Hello and welcome to GS Podcast number 15. I've got a great show for you and a fantastic guest. Peter Boghossian is going to be joining us to share some ideas. Peter's a philosophy instructor, amongst many other things, from the United States. He's also the author of A Manual for Creating Atheists. Luckily, there's been no shortage of critiques of faith and religion in print in the last 10 years, which is a great thing. Many of them take the form of pointing out the internal inconsistencies of scripture, maybe shedding a bit of doubt on the historicity of these central figures. What Peter's book aims to do is very much different from what we've seen. It hopes to equip the reader with the knowledge, skill set and tools necessary to converse with someone of faith in a civil manner, and help them come to the realisation that faith is a very poor method by which to discern truth and knowledge. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you can find a link to that on the podcast page on my blog. You'll also find a link to Peter's Twitter there, at Peter Boghossian. He's a wonderful guy. If you've enjoyed hearing from him today or you've learned anything at all, send him a few words on Twitter to let him know. I'm sure he'll be grateful to get some feedback. Please enjoy. I'm delighted to have with me now on the GS podcast, Peter Boghossian. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. I've been slightly anxious over the pronunciation of your surname for a few days, but I'm hoping I nailed it.
You got it perfectly. It's like explosion with a B. Boghossian explosion.
I bet you've had some fairly creative attempts at pronouncing that in the past.
I have. That was my campaign platform I ran on when I was in the 7th grade. Vote for Boghossian and there'll be an explosion.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, you couldn't really do that today. At least in the States, you couldn't do that.
No.
Times have changed.
Yeah, explosion's not the most positive platform for candidacy, I would imagine.
It is not.
No.
At least in this country, it's not.
Okay, well, I was wondering if you'd be so kind as to tell us about yourself. Just basically let us know what gets you out of bed in the morning.
What gets me up in the morning?
That's just a figurative question.
Yeah, right. I was taking it rather literally. I think it's more interesting if it's, what gets me up in the morning? I don't know. My kids get me up in the morning, and my dog literally physically gets me up in the morning. He comes in, or I get up around 5:35. He comes in every day and licks me until he's fed. The things that motivate me are just teaching people how to think, learning how to think myself, discarding false beliefs, living a more authentic life, becoming more sincere, having more relationships with people in my life that are based on honesty and authenticity and acceptance. I like reading a lot, and I love science fiction television, but I never have time to do that anymore. But that's one of my passions as well.
What's some of your favorite sci-fi?
Blake 7, Farscape, Battlestar Galactica. Boy, I don't even know. I love it. I have a ferocious appetite when it comes to digesting science fiction TV. I like TV more than movies, although I'll watch movies, but TV really gives me more of an opportunity to.
Are you still with me? Hello?
I think the power went out in my house. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah. What happened there?
That's a good failing infrastructure due to the Iraq War. I don't know.
Divine smiting, perhaps.
Misplaced budgetary priorities. Highly unlikely a smiting. If that's a smiting, then I accept.
Yeah, you'll take that, will you? You were saying you prefer TV sci-fi over film sci-fi. I suppose there's been a bit of a switch in terms of what's cool to do nowadays in terms of TV and movies. I think a lot of your actors and your writers want to be working on TV. It seems to be the place to be.
Yeah, I think that's true. And a few years ago, it was pronounced that it's the golden age of television. If that would be one thing, like if I could really do a couple of things for myself, it would be do more jujitsu and watch more science fiction television. But unfortunately, we have this faith problem that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed immediately because there's an urgent. It's a crisis.
Absolutely. I mean, I've reread your A Manual for Creating Atheists again recently, and I think one of the mantras that I'm certainly guilty of throwing this out before, and I hear it a lot, is you can't reason someone out of a position they didn't arrive at reasonably. But I'd understand you'd probably think that's a bit short-sighted.
I think. Well, okay. Well, there's some really interesting peer-reviewed literature and some data on that. One study is Analytical Thinking Promotes Disbelief. I think that's the name of it. And there have been some really interesting studies in which people who have firm convictions were shown pieces of evidence that didn't comport with their pre-existing ideological bent or commitments. And the consequence of that was they became more certain of the positions they held. So it's a complicated question. And I think I talk in the book about Pascal Boyer and others. It's a very, very complicated question. I think, and the data is interesting. Skeptic Magazine, Michael Shermer's Skeptic Magazine, published a really interesting article a few years ago about, I teach a science and pseudoscience class. If you look at the science and pseudoscience class as an intervention, and you do a pre-test and a post-test, that is, you give students a list of things, and you could put it on, like, for example, a Likert scale. How likely is alien abductions, or whatever homeopathy, whatever pseudoscientific silliness people ascribe to. And then you give them the class, and you look at that as the intervention, and then you post-test them. We know for a fact that we can move people on certain indices. I mean, we know that. The data is not just suggestive, it's conclusive. But here's what's interesting to me. If this piece of pseudoscience, maybe if it's creationism, intelligent design or something, has emotional valence, if it emotionally resonates with people and people have their feeling states attached to this, or they think that holding a particular belief makes them a better person, then those beliefs are much more difficult to dislodge. So it's not simply a question if people are unreasoned, if people don't hold their beliefs because of reason, then you can't get them out of those beliefs. It's more nuanced and complicated and subtle than that.
Okay, I mean, I think where many people go wrong in that case is that you have an expectation that if you provide facts to somebody that debunks their claims, the logical response would be, well, they'll change their mind. But what you're saying is that's not actually usually the case.
No, in certain stages, and in the book, I use this thing called the trans-theoretical model. And it basically, you try to move, it comes from a lot of literature that people use in drug and alcohol counseling to a certain extent in the prisons with things. And basically, you're trying to move people down a certain scale. And many people, it is absolutely true that many people do not formulate their beliefs on the basis of evidence. And they're really trapped into certain ways of viewing the world or certain ways of thinking about things. And very smart, sincere people think, well, if I just provided this person with a data point, he's missing or she's missing something. But that's not true. I mean, look, here's my best piece of evidence I have for that. Ken Ham, right? It's just not true that if you provided him with any single data point, he'd change his mind, or a nexus of data points. It's false. And so one of the things that smart, intelligent people have a problem with in terms of the book is, well, I disagree. We just need to show them more evidence. But people didn't get to the position. They don't hold the positions they hold now because of evidence. They hold the positions they hold now because they don't value evidence and reason. And no amount of evidence and reason can help them out of that. Well, let me rephrase that. No amount of evidence can help them out of that. So we need to approach the situation differently to help them.
Where do you fall on the debate on public intellectuals or prominent scientists like Bill Nye giving a platform to people like Ken Ham? Do you think that's helpful?
No.
No, I think I'm inclined to agree.
Yeah. I think, and I published 2 pieces with James Lindsay for the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science, and I articulated my position about why I thought it was a mistake. Fortunately, in terms of the actual debate, if one can call it that, I don't even like the term debate because that assumes that there's something to be debated. Fortunately, it turned out well. It could have gone the other way, but it turned out well.
I was wondering if maybe you could explain then, just moving back to the book, what the term epistemology means and how you use it in the context of street epistemology.
Sure. Epistemology just means how one knows, oversimplified, but basically how one knows what one knows, how we come to knowledge. And so traditionally people have used the word epistemology in academic contexts. And I really like the juxtaposition of the word street, this gritty, grimy, this place in the public space, this agoria, this place in which people have conversations that are outside of the academy. And so it's the contrast between when you're in the streets, the prisons, the bars, what have you, how people come to knowledge. And street epistemology is a way, just by talking to people, to help them have more reliable ways of coming to knowledge.
I've noticed a sort of trend with the more intelligent people of faith who are making faith-based claims that they'll play the term epistemology as a card. Often when you ask them how they know what they claim, they'll turn the attention to how we can know anything. I call this myself the epistemology shield, but I think I've heard you describe it as meta-epistemology.
Yeah, so that's one. Okay, so remember what's happening. Let's take a step back from this conversation, okay? So what's happening is that people have a kind of mimetic, cognitive, undiagnosed virus that's affected their cognitions. And the virus has certain defensive mechanisms to prevent it from becoming dislodged. There are many, we could actually have a whole show about this. So, one of those would be, don't revise your belief. Once you have a feeling state and you have confidence that that's true, or it's the testament of the Holy Spirit. The other interesting feature of that defensive mechanism is that people will say anything in order to hold the belief, in order to justify or rationalize the belief to themselves. And speaking with other people I think it's a way to discharge those urges, to put up a shield to prevent the faith virus from being eradicated, from being dislodged from its host. So people will say things like, well, you have faith in science, or how can you possibly know anything? Quantum mechanics means all of reality is relative, or my faith is true for me. But you don't hear that much in terms of the fundamentalist apologist cadre. So again, when you're talking to people, you have to remember that many people of faith from the get-go have wedded themselves and committed themselves to this. So how do we help them break through these delusions that they have? Because remember, to you and me, it's fairly obvious, right, that there are conflicting faith traditions and they can't all be true. It can't possibly be the case that Muhammad was the last prophet and Joseph Smith, who lived after Muhammad, was the prophet.
Sure.
Yet we have people who sincerely hold these beliefs. And while that may be obvious to you and me, that's part of the defensive mechanism to keep the way of misperceiving reality in place.
How do you think that we can get people to be comfortable with just saying, you know what, I don't know? I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I feel like I've trained myself to do it, but even now when I'm faced with a question, I'm not sure if my instinct is to think of 10 reasons.
Yeah. Well, thanks for reading the book. I can tell you got that one. But I think it's a complicated problem. So here's what I think, and I get people griefing me about this all the time. I don't think that the problem, and I've spoken about this in my public lectures repeatedly, I don't think that the problem is that people lack any skill set. I don't think if you gave people the tools for can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, I'm still with you.
Oh, sorry, I thought I faded out. If you give people certain tools, I think I'm having problems with my power again, but that's neither here nor there. So I don't think I don't ascribe any agency to that power problem. If you give people the tools to think critically, that doesn't mean that they're going to use those tools. So what I think we need to do is to promote the attitudinal dispositions that enable people to use the tools in the first place. And being honest with oneself, being sincere, having a willingness to revise one's beliefs, those are the values that we need to promote. We don't need to promote I shouldn't say don't need to promote, but more important than the skill set are the values. But the problem is that we have a difficulty in assessing those values. Educators have a difficulty because one can just make these claims. So I think we have to create cultures in which How we do that is another question. But we need to create cultures where people value honesty and authenticity and sincerity. And when people are asked a question that they don't know, they say, I don't know. And the whole idea that somebody would ridicule someone for saying, I don't know, is incredibly dangerous. It's detrimental.
Okay. Do you think this sort of attitudinal shift is something that's achievable?
Yes, unquestionably. I know it's achievable because we've achieved it with other things. We've achieved it now with gender egalitarianism. We've achieved it in terms of racially, the way that we view race in this country. We've achieved it in terms of in marriages, and I would even argue that maybe this is going to sound like it doesn't quite fit, but even to a certain extent, we've achieved it in terms of animal welfare, animal rights.
Sure, yeah. I mean, they're all fantastic models for which to sort of strive for sort of inspiration for. Gay rights movement as well. That's a very unpopular thing to be campaigning for not so long ago, and now obviously it's gone from strength to strength. Yeah,
and that's, by the way, that's in an extremely short period of time. I mean, the data about gay rights movement, that's really been in the last, well, depending on how the question is parsed out, but those attitudinal shifts have really been in the last 10 years, which is remarkable.
What sort of what's the worst response you've had to practicing street epistemology? Have you any sort of nightmare stories?
Yeah, I have some people. I mean, it depends. It depends on the context. I'm always gentle and respectful. So there are times when you just have to be resilient and you have to adapt to the person with whom you're speaking. But nobody ever punched me in the head or shot me.
Yet.
Yet I'm hoping that's not the case. I don't even want to, even talking about it, hopefully will, I don't even want to talk about it because then it could give someone some ideation. But anybody who wants to kill me, look, if you shoot me, my book will be a bestseller, and then you really undermine what it is that you're trying to do.
I think what you do is what's really smart, which it seems obvious, but when you read it, it's the kind of thing you think, oh yeah, of course, is you go for the faith claims and try and keep religion out of the mix as much as you can.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's the case. They're inherently and this really gets over what the definition of the word faith is and a lot of the games that people like to play. Again, because remember, what you're really doing, I can't remember, I saw one of these, I was on the treadmill and I saw one of these talking heads on TV a few years ago, and he was interviewing a few people, and one woman, so this is going to sound a little like an odd story, but one woman brought in her mother who does a lot of drugs, and he said to her, I'm not going to talk to you because that would be like talking to the drugs. It's the drugs speaking through you. And sometimes I feel like that's the faith virus. It's really hijacked people's cognitions and even their vocal capacity. And so how do we, when we're speaking, when we're engaging people, how do we differentiate or separate or make sure that these claims don't become personal? Because often people really are acting from a point of view of defending what they believe. That's what I was actually just typing a tweet about that. When people substitute a desire to know with when someone thinks that they've already found the truth, they don't look for the truth anymore.
Yeah.
But part of that is that we need to help people to constantly value revisiting. That's what the scientific method is: revisiting, rethinking, being open to say, I don't know, which was your question initially. And faith shuts down what I would consider to be intellectual virtues. So how do we help people through that?
Okay, I mean, what would you say to those who maybe try and dismiss this as just another form of preaching or proselytizing? Or is that something you'd be comfortable with hearing?
Yeah, I've never really understood that. I've said it, Stefan Molyneux said it, and I really love it, so I'm going to use his quotation. If someone thinks that the earth is shaped like a banana, and you show them that the earth is not shaped like a banana, have you proselytized to them? You haven't proselytized. You've educated them. They had a mistaken view of reality, and it's a form of education. You've showed them that the view of reality that they had was not an accurate depiction of what actually is. The other thing is, I don't know, I'm always struck when I hear that. I don't know any proselytizers who talk about the importance of belief revision. They don't talk about the desire to know, they talk about the desire to believe. And I'm explicitly saying that we need to reconceptualize how we think about problems and be willing to revise our beliefs. To me, sounds like, unless I'm misunderstanding what the criticism, that's the furthest from proselytizing you can get.
Yeah, I agree. I always think it's an odd contention when a person who's committed to a faith-based ideology will accuse you of having a similar faith in, say, science. It's almost as if they know faith isn't reliable, and that's why they're tagging you with the same sort of malady.
Right, and that's exactly what I talk about in the book.
Talking back to the book, you mentioned the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
Right.
And these religious delusions are actually granted an exemption in that. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct.
So you'd be someone who'd say campaign to have that privilege removed.
Privilege is an interesting. Yeah. I guess it is. Yeah, it is a privilege. I like thinking about it in terms of a privilege. Yeah, I think it should be removed because social and political considerations shouldn't mediate or interfere with scientific deliberations. I think the idea that people get a pass on their delusions because other people share those delusions, there's something disingenuine about that. There's just something not genuine about that. It's something that undermines what science is about. Science ought not to take social considerations into account. I mean, I think one of the things is we learned that from the DSM and homosexuality.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, that would have been categorized as a mental disorder not too long ago, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and that was a reflection, or to use a kind of a $2 word, to reify it, it reflected the values of society at large. And so we need to really be more honest when we do science and put checks and balances on ourselves to make sure we don't bring our own assumptions into our own social and political assumptions into the mix. Now, there are, of course, more egregious examples of this. Many people have said that there's a Republican war on science. I'm sure that's true to some extent. I think Democrats have their own, I don't want to call them idiosyncrasies, but Democrats have their own ideological commitments that interfere with the scientific process and make their conclusions less or more biased. But it does certainly seem to be a problem in the United States and in general, and a problem with Republicans in particular. And again, I think your question was a good one. Like, how do we move? It's really the central theme, I think. How do we move people to say, I don't know? How do we move people to be more okay with being uncertain? I'm not saying I have the answer to that, but I think the book is an answer to that when taken in the context of other, well, actually in Chapter 9, I make other proposals for what we can do to help nudge society to be more rational and more reasonable.
Okay, I mean, how would you speak to somebody who's quite suspicious or skeptical of science based on mistakes of the past? Like we just spoke about the miscategorization of homosexuality. I think that possibly would have been put forward under a scientific pretext at the time.
How would I speak to them? Well, first of all, there's a really good little book. Thomas Kuhn wrote this book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and there's a interesting line of literature and scholarship, Feyerabend and others, based upon that idea. So how would I speak to somebody? Here's what I would say to someone. You're absolutely correct that history has been littered with the arrogance of people who thought that they had the final truth. They had some kind of a cultural myopia in terms of what they thought they knew. It's kind of they were short-sighted, and they thought that culturally the values that they held were true and the scientific findings of the day were true, and they were later overturned. And I think you're right. One lesson we should derive from this is that we need to be more humble about what it is that we claim to know. That's the other thing that I think this whole project is about. It's a project not only of hope, but of humility. We need to teach people to value the idea of humility. So it's genuinely intellectual, cognitive, epistemological humility. The people need to be less cocksure, less certain, and more humble about their knowledge claims. And yes, that extends into conclusions that come about as a result of a scientific process.
Okay, so I mean, you released these ideas in your book in 2013. I was wondering if you just to give us an idea of what the fallout's been like from it. Have you heard anything that's caused you to revise anything in the book or change your mind on anything?
It was released in October. Let's see. It was released in November 1 or something like that. So it's been out not even a year, half a year. Have I heard anything in 6 months that's caused me to revise? Yeah, I would put, hindsight is of course always 20/20, but I would have put additional notes in chapter 2 detailing or explaining how some people use the word faith. That's one thing I would do. I would flesh out chapter 2. I would take the criticisms that I've read and I would include those, and many of those are technical criticisms, so they really don't belong in the chapter, they belong in the notes. I would take those technical criticisms and I would respond to them in a way that if one were having a conversation with someone who either held that belief or purported to hold that belief, I'd try to articulate that in a clear way to address that concern.
Maybe there's scope for a revised edition down the line at some point, maybe. But I mean, one of the things I would say is that the footnotes are fantastic, and I don't think I've ever said that about a book I've ever read. They sort of go unnoticed, but they're full chock of information and resources, a lot of which I've jotted down, and I'm going to add to my Amazon wish list, I think, because it's really helpful. But going back to what you were saying about faith and how we define it, I think you define it as pretending to know things that you don't. Is that right? That
is one definition, yeah.
Right, and where do people get confused in terms of the definition of faith and hope? I hear this a lot from people.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. It's funny, I was just thinking about that today as well. I almost don't think about anything else anymore. I think, again, people get confused when the first way they get confused, one way they get confused is by the words they use. So the words we use are very important. And people have not been as judicious in their use of words as they ought to be. Hope, trust, faith, confidence. And I think that's a problem. Another problem, I think, people get confused when they replace, and I was just on a podcast with a Christian, Phil Vischer, who's actually a really nice guy. Quite enjoyed talking to him. He's a Christian, he's the VeggieTales guy. And we talked about the difference between faith and hope, and it's vital that those words are disambiguated. In other words, it's vital that we clarify what we mean by these. Often people are just talking past each other when they use words like that. So one confusion comes when people use the word hope for something that's not based upon reason. I mean, you can hope for anything you want. That doesn't increase the likelihood that the thing you're hoping for is true.
I mean, talking about the Christian podcaster you've just mentioned, would he be happy to accept your understanding of what faith means, or would he have a different perception?
Well, we had some agreements on, and I was, the purpose of that conversation really was to try to model behaviors of civility. I don't know about how it is in your country, but we've become incredibly uncivil in this country. And people scream at each other and hurl invectives and call each other nasty names. And it's almost made it so that genuine dialogue or discourse is impossible, or at the very least difficult. People are offended, name-calling, speech codes at universities where you can't talk about things to offend people. And I think it's really important for your listeners and everyone to know that it's not only is it possible to have civil conversations with people, but it's essential. It's indispensable. That's the sort of civility, and I think that podcast was modeled that kind of civility where two people were genuinely listening to each other. Both people were sincere. They could not possibly have had more antithetical epistemologies and worldview, not only how you know the world, but what there is in the world. So we came to some agreement on when we could use the word faith, but we had a disagreement in other contexts of when we use the word faith. And so he's invited me back on the show, and at some point in the future, I think I'd like to explore, now that we've cemented some agreements, I'd like to explore some disagreements.
Oh, that's good to hear. I think obviously, if you've got two people with opposing viewpoints, if you can remain civil, it's very unlikely you'll change each other's mind. But when you both come away from it, you both had your understanding expanded.
Yeah, one of the things I talk about in the book is exactly how to change someone's mind. And the way to change someone's mind is not to yell at them. The way to change someone's mind is to understand the claims they make, hone in on how they know those claims, and help them either one of two things. Either help them to see that the way that they think that they know, they can't rely upon that to lead them to the truth. So the claim that they have is false. Or they can rely upon that to lead them to the truth, and in which case they've taught you something, and then you need to revise your beliefs and adopt their epistemology. So either one of those outcomes are incredibly positive.
I think I had my first intervention the other day.
Wonderful. What happened?
It was a group of colleagues talking about astrology and horoscopes, and they were talking in a very matter-of-fact way about how their predictions had come true, and it was accurate. And I just asked them, usually my default response would be, it's all nonsense, it's bunk. I'd reel off a load of facts about Barnum statements and studies. And I thought, well, we'll go a bit Socratic. And I just asked them, how do you know it's true? And they just basically the usual stuff. They said, I was told that something good was going to happen and this good thing happened. Yep. So I said, well, that's interesting. What about the millions of people who were the same star sign who probably met an unfortunate end that day? Statistically, there would have been so many of them, a lot of them. How do you explain that?
Right.
So they went from being certain that astrology was correct to, well, it's not reliable, which is an improvement. Wow.
And we mentioned the trans-theoretical model. That's two jumps. That's two stages in the trans-theoretical model. So you did a little street epistemology, and it seems that it turned out well for you.
Absolutely, because like I say, my normal default instinct is to begin with the accusation that it's nonsense, which, like you say, it's not. I think sometimes you have to differentiate between a debate format where your views are either benefiting an audience or a one-on-one situation when the goal should be to change the person's mind. Often when you're debating, I don't think you're trying to change the person's mind. I think you're trying to put on a show that'll benefit the audience.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the other thing is that when you did that, you don't really know about the long-term effect that's going to have on him. Like, you don't know, you're only seeing a snapshot of his belief life.
Yeah, I suppose it's like planting a seed.
Yeah, it could have been the thing that knocked him off I'm trying to think of a metaphor for like an engine of belief that doesn't get you to where you want to go. I kind of like a broken choo-choo. I couldn't think of a metaphor, but you could have you really could have benefited his life tremendously. I heard a guy in my class give a presentation, a very heartfelt, sincere presentation about chemtrails. He's basically the planes leaving these trails. People think they're chemicals. And one person in the class asked, well, what's the harm of that? And he said, I was paranoid. I was afraid to go outside. I lived my life in fear. Now, I'm not saying that astrology necessarily has that, but the more that we can nudge people toward reason and rationality, the better it will be for everyone in aggregate. And I've always argued that the way to do that, given that we have two epistemic goals, and I talk about this in my Jesus, the Easter Bunny, and other delusions, just say no talk, we all want to have true beliefs, as many as possible, and we all want to have as few false beliefs as possible. I think it's far more important to attempt to disabuse oneself of false beliefs just because you get more bang for the buck. And we know that there are tools like fallacy recognition and things like that that help people, that move people in that direction. But again, we're talking about attitudinal dispositions. If people don't have the right attitudes to move them in the direction in the first place, then the skill set doesn't do any good.
I mean, you mentioned your talk on the Easter Bunny and things like that. I mean, you're a father yourself. How do you navigate these issues with children? Because they're so, Father Christmas, they're so culturally ingrained. They're going to be exposed to them. Well, it's inevitable, really, that they will hear this. How do you deal with these sort of myths?
My first response is I've never lied to my children about it, but I need to really reflect on that and make sure that that's absolutely positive. But let's just say that that's tentatively true, because I'm trying to think if there was ever a time. I mean, there could certainly have been a time where I was, kidding about something, but I've never. If my kid has asked me about something I believe, I'm either going to tell them the truth or I'm going to tell them I'm not going to answer the question. I can't imagine they would, but like an intimate sex detail with my wife or something. So I can't imagine that, but that would be an example of when I'd say I'm not going to answer that question. So when my kids ask me a question, I think you can have a more authentic relationship with them by not telling them what you think you should tell them or what they want to hear, but with what you actually believe. I think if you do that, the other thing that will do is that will help you to have a more authentic life as well.
I think it's quite positive to see that a lot of people are engaging now with how they should educate the children in a secular, objective way. There's a lot of help groups and books out there now. I mean, I speak to the National Secular Society. I had the president on the show, and he said one of the number one things and complaints or concerns that they receive are from parents who want to know how the children can get an objective education.
Right. Great. That's a great point. I'm just writing the foreword just today, actually. I was writing the foreword to Dan Arrell's book about secular parenting, which is a wonderful little book that should be out within the year. In my book, I talk about raising godless children or raising a free-thinking children. And I think again, that starts with the attitude of honesty with oneself and sincerity and not making forbidden fruits. Again, it's a complicated problem, and there are lines of literature. There are actually secular camps, Camp Quest, and I think a guy, Dale McGowan, has some good trying to think of the name of the book. I can't remember the name of the book right now, but he had two books. Has some good literature on that. It is important, and it's unfortunate that we need to think about raising free-thinking kids, but that's just the nature of the beast in the society we live in.
Just a shift of gears, I wanted to get your opinion on something. I know you've done a lot of work in the prison service.
Yep. And
one of the main things that obviously people struggle to divorce is faith and morality, as if they're intrinsically linked, which obviously we know is not the case. But a counterexample of this often is atheists will cite the high level of religiosity in prisons. And often the counter-argument to that, I'll hear people say, well, they're obviously feigning religion in order to get a more lenient sentence. I was wondering if you think there's any truth to that in your experience?
Part of the problem is people will lie. I hate to say particularly prison inmates, but they certainly are motivated to that. Drug addicts to a large extent too, malingering, feigning pain. People will lie to achieve benefits. It's hard to test that. It's really hard to test somebody's sincerity when they say they believe in a talking snake or Muhammad, particularly in the case of Islam, because there are further repercussions for that. But it's very difficult in many communities, certainly not all communities, many nation states. But it's very difficult to test whether or not people actually believe what it is that they say they believe. I mean, certainly many people are pretending to know things they don't know because they want to receive social benefits from that. And Dan Dennett has two good pieces he's put out with Linda Lascola that detail just that. But it's a complicated question, and it's particularly a complicated question in the context of inmate education and prison inmates.
What's your experience with prison inmates been like? Have you found it to be a positive experience?
Awesome. Unmediated, raw, real, fantastic conversations where nobody is bullshitting anybody. Nobody is worrying about a grade. Everybody's totally authentic and honest in saying exactly what they think and what they mean. It's been a fantastic experience to ask prison inmates why they think what they do, about their moral lives, about their beliefs, about their love interests. It's been a wonderful experience.
Are there any common themes that come up? I mean, is there any correlations you can draw between incarceration and putting too much stock in faith?
Tough
one.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an immediate answer. I'd have to think about that. I mean, one of the things I can say is that prison inmates don't need prayer or faith. The two golden metrics for recidivism, the number of, we don't really think in terms of recidivism, that is the number of people who go out and come back, but they're jobs and housing in that order. And so shouldn't say always say in that order because you need housing, but some kind of stable housing. But people don't need to pray about jobs and housing. They actually need jobs and housing. And so I think, I mean, again, faith in prisons is a particularly tricky it's a very complicated, tricky, slippery slope given the number of, tricky situation given the number of different faith traditions, the number of different prisons, the types of different incarceration facilities. It's a very complicated question.
Talking of complicated questions, what would it take for you to believe in God?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for asking me that question. I went over that in my conversation with Richard Dawkins for about 15 minutes, and that's available on YouTube. So maybe I'll use that as a substitute answer.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I think I've heard Lawrence Krauss talk about something being spelled out in the configuration of stars might.
Yeah, that's right. That's in my book. Yeah. Okay, so I'll just briefly say. So I'll tell you what it couldn't be. It couldn't be a feeling state that I have because I couldn't differentiate that from a delusion or test it. So no feeling states will do it. So all these people who think they have the testament of the Holy Spirit or the witness of the Holy Spirit, I can tell you in no uncertain terms, my Quran tutor is one of these people. People feel so strongly about things and they have different convictions. Conviction doesn't map on to the terrain of external reality. So it's not any feeling state. It's not anything in the world. So it couldn't be, I walk outside, there are glowing orbs, or as you said, the example I use in the book from Krauss is there stars spell out our names or believe in me in different languages. Couldn't be that because you'd have to rule out other possibilities. And again, people of faith might hear this and say, you're freaking kidding me. That wouldn't be enough for you. So maybe we have a different threshold for what constitutes reliable evidence to warrant belief. But no, it wouldn't be enough. It would have to be something that I can reason toward. But not just that I could reason toward, but it would have to be something that, I suppose this is a difference between deism and theism. The more deistic the claim, the more abstract the argument could be. The less deistic the claim, like the more theistic the claim, the more generally accessible to a large number of people the claim would have to be.
Yeah, I think the issue we've got is everyone's got a different definition of God and what that entails. So until we can really pin that down, it's difficult to say what would be convincing.
What would be convincing? What would be convincing to who? To me? Because I can already tell you for an absolute fact, that there are some people who are sincere in their beliefs because of their internal feeling states.
I wasn't asking you what would be convincing, but more the problem we've got is that the definition of people's definition of what God is so vague and broad at the same time. It's hard to pin down anything that could be convincing.
Yeah, and you think it's bad for God. It's even worse for faith. Right? It's much worse to secure a definition because then that allows you to latch on to something. And once you latch on to something, then you can bring some tools to bear on it. And the faith virus, that makes it susceptible. So that's out.
Given you someone who's right in the thick of the sort of secular movement in America, I wanted to get your opinion on, obviously you spoke previously about academic institutions and people taking offence. I just wondered if I could get your opinion on the controversy surrounding Ayaan Hirsi Ali at the moment. Okay, I think that is a great, timely, and important question. What we've done in our institutions of higher education, and I'm not saying that this is universally the case. It certainly seems to be the case in many, if not most, institutions in the U.S., and certainly Britain. Britain might even be in a worse predicament than we are. We attempt to buttress people from ideas that could possibly offend them. I was thinking about – I'll answer your question directly after I kind of muse about something. Sure.
The CEO of Mozilla was more or less forced out when it was found out that he gave a campaign contribution to an anti-homosexual group. When we think about these things, these are really complicated questions because we want to maintain people's rights to support and believe what they want to believe. We also want to maintain and I want to see if I can give this answer without being overly technical. I'm talking about these related issues in my ethics class. We also want to make sure that think about it this way. Let's say someone said to you, hey, I have nothing against gays. I really don't. I just don't think that they should be allowed to marry. So think about if you substituted the word gays for blacks. I have nothing against blacks. I really don't. I just don't think they should be allowed to marry. Boy, I really hope that nobody takes that sound clip and takes a text. You might have to edit that out. But why shouldn't we feel the same horror when someone says that about gays? Like, why didn't I make that joke about gays? Well, because we're not there yet in our society. But even if we were, I personally think that the best way, I agree with Hitchens on this, the best way to expose bad ideas is to shine light on them. It's to open them up to the marketplace of ideas, to criticism. It's not to hide them. I think the idea that Brandeis is trying to protect students, again, there could be something else going on that I'll mention in a moment, but I think it's intellectually dishonest. I think it does the students a disservice. And I would say that even if her conclusions did not agree with my own. Now, I will say that there's something that many of your listeners probably have not thought of, and I only say that from the position that I'm actually in this kind of academic game, and your listeners may not have thought of the fact that higher education is a business. And in Portland State, for example, many state schools, students from out of state spend more money. They pay more money for tuition. And so I don't know how many Muslim students go there, but maybe the administration is worried about dwindling or diminishing revenue. I will say that this idea that somehow we have to protect Muslim students from being offended is patronizing, it's discriminatory, it's racist, and that actually is racist if you look at it in terms of when people are talking about Arab students and money's flowing in from Arab countries. I don't see any evidence for that. The only evidence I see for that is that people make these unbelievable sweeping inferences based upon a small sample size. So are there a few very vocal Muslims who are perpetually and perennially outraged? Yeah, sure there are. But to make an inference to the vast majority of Muslims, it's just simply untrue. I mean, it's not in this country. That's just not borne out by the data. And I do think one of the things that you see happening is that you see the left as the new racists.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, I suppose you've got to try and separate the people from the ideas. A Muslim isn't Islam. That's right. I mean, a Muslim is. So here's an example of the reason why the words we use are so important. This crazy idea that Islam is a race is perpetuated by people on the left, which is just blatantly false. And as I've said in I think it was in my talk in Abbotsford, Canada. We could talk about this if you want. I will say right now, this is a very complicated thing that would need to bring in terms like the difference between Islamism, which is the political movement that uses Islam as an ideological tool to further hegemonic ends, or we could talk about just Islam. And then even with that, we'd have to break it down. It's a very, very, very complicated problem. But what I do see is, and I don't know if it's born out of fear. I don't know the genesis of the idea, but I'll tell you, I think it's incredibly condescending to Muslim students to paint Muslim students with a brush of we ought not to offend them, because a very, very small, I would go so far as to say almost infinitesimal, but extraordinarily vocal, not even a minority, like a sub minority of Muslim students are upset. That somehow because someone is a Muslim, they can't handle an idea. That's incredibly condescending to people. Yeah, I agree. Luckily, I can only speak for the UK, but we're starting to see a lot of prominent Muslim speakers standing up and saying, look, Islamists don't speak for me. These people who are offended don't speak for me. I'm not offended. I'm secure in my religion, and all ideas are open to criticism as such, which is good to see.
What happened to the guy who tweeted that? I forgot his name. I'm not offended by this. Boy, he was excoriated. He was excoriated by some very radical Islamists. That's who he was excoriated by. And he was excoriated by people on the left.
Yeah, Majid Nawaz is the gentleman, and very bright person. Obviously, he's a devout Muslim, I'm an atheist, so at some point we're going to disagree, but we both seem to value the same things, which is, free speech, equality. So you sort of want to form a relationship with these people.
Yeah, and again, I think that's what's important about a part of my project, is that I want to bring more civility to these discussions. Because right now, it's very uncivil. And it's even uncivil in the schisms within the atheist community and in the schisms, and I'm not even talking about Shia Sunni, I'm talking about split in Islam, or leaving the Abrahamic faith traditions. A friend of mine said to me, in-group attacks always feel worse than out-of-group attacks. Like when an atheist writes something or says something to me, about this, they feel different than when someone who doesn't share an epistemology or share one's, a theist, for example. Those criticisms feel different.
It's almost like a family member.
Yeah. And it's disappointing to see the vitriol, and I don't even know, maybe this is going off tangent or going off a tangent. I don't even know if you have any set agenda, but I don't even know that I've been starting to question this idea that there's an atheist movement. I mean, it's an odd notion, really, when you stop to think about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I feel anxious about identifying as an atheist, but on the same token, I do feel it's necessary in order to provide some level of pushback to a really, religiously saturated culture. Yeah,
and in the book I talk about, it doesn't make one iota of difference to me how people self-identify. I personally, atheism simply is not part of my identity. I know that must sound bizarre to some people, but it's just not.
I feel the same. I'd like to just, I think, I don't like self-identifying as a rational thinker or a skeptic. I don't think you should really label yourself with them terms. I think they should just be goals to aim for constantly. Yeah,
the type of people we want to become. And I don't want to become an atheist. I'm not committed to atheism. I was reading an article today that a buddy of mine from the Dawkins Foundation sent to me. And it used a funny expression. It was like, they want help explain what atheists believe. What atheists believe? What kind of a comment is that?
Oh, it's like asking a vegetarian what the favorite meat is.
Yeah, what atheists? It'd be like, well, what do non-stamp collectors believe? What kind of? But I guess there's a lot of confusion out there, and confusion about some pretty silly stuff. So hopefully we'll be able to move past that and get on to more meaningful things: world poverty, cleaning up the environment, etc.
Sure. So, what's taking up your time at the moment then? Have you got any new projects on the horizon you want to share?
Yeah, I got a game coming out with a company, Elbowfish, that I'm particularly excited about. It's a critical thinking and creative thinking game, and it works on exactly that, the attitudinal dispositions, the things that we couldn't get to in other contexts. And it's kind of a fun party game, and it's really cool. We're just doing waterfall testing. It just goes through multiple iterations, working with a local artist. I've got an app that I work on every day that I'm writing. It's massive in its scope. It's so massive that sometimes I just sit back and I say, "You're kidding me." It's set up like the belt system in jiu-jitsu, and I downloaded every atheist app out there. And I looked to see what was out there. Not everyone, or I looked online or what have you, but a lot of them. I'm sure there might have missed a few. But I looked at them, and I'm putting together this massive, absolutely a plan, a grand design plan for what everyone would need to know to talk someone out of faith and superstition and into reason. And it would be it's structured like the jiu-jitsu system with belts: white, blue, purple, brown, and black. And then they have conversation trees where you pick answers where people say something. It's like a little training tool.
Oh, wow.
I have that. I'm working on that. And then I have a Kindle single that I'm working on with my buddy. And then hopefully I'm going to be pitching my show. I have a show about how to talk people out of faith and into reason, and I have conversations that I'm going to do. I'm not sure if I'm going to – I think it's going to be pitched to some big networks. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is. So I was thinking about kickstarting it if it didn't, but frankly I'm too busy and I just have too many things going on, not to mention the fact that I teach an incredible number of students every term. So I have a lot of things that are going on right now, and talks coming up all over the place. I've been this is a full-time job fighting the faith virus.
Yeah. Any plans for sleep at any point?
I only slept about 5 hours last night, and I was a little concerned about this because I was so tired. Yeah, I have to. I've told myself I have to start sleeping a little more and exercising. I've been doing the exercising, which is pretty good, but the sleep is always problematic. I'll tell you one thing I did that was tremendously helped my sleep was I stopped drinking caffeine after 1.
Ah, right. Okay.
Yeah, 1 p.m. And I just felt, I even if I had a Diet Coke at night, it would just keep me up. So I've curtailed my caffeine, and then I've actually increased my caffeine intake in the morning.
Yeah, right. 10 cups before 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
Someone's tweeted by the name of Reverend Sim. Well, it says Rev Sim. Just wondering have you got any plans to come to the UK at any point?
I don't have any plans, but certainly if I'm invited, I'll go.
I might be having a barbecue at weekend if you're interested.
Will you invite me to your barbecue? I'm there. You let me know. Hopefully we can get a free thought organization to sponsor me. It'd have to be around my school schedule, obviously. But yeah, I'd love to go back to the UK.
Excellent. All right, Peter. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved talking to you.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. It's a kind of you to have me on, and I'm delighted that you like the book. And thanks for giving me an opportunity to speak to the listeners. I appreciate that.
You're very, very welcome. Unless there's anything else, I'll let you get back to your day.
Nope, that's it. Just wanted to say thanks again, and I appreciate the time that people took to listen to the podcast and to read the book. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to the GS podcast. Don't forget you can find links to Peter's book and his Twitter account on the podcast page of my blog. Don't forget you can support the podcast as well by either writing a review on iTunes or Stitcher, depending on how you listen, or maybe contributing to some of the hosting costs. You can do that by visiting gspellchecker.wordpress.com. I think we've all learned something today.